Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Well, it is officially winter, and if you have oil in your house, you're probably using a lot more than you expected to as it gets a little bit colder. We're going to talk about ways to energy-proof your home, make it a place that saves energy, and also on the back end of that, if you're thinking of doing renovations or any kind of work around your house, what you can do to increase keeping the heat in and keeping your dollars down in terms of heating costs. And we're going to start with that with an amazing architect. He's in the New York area, well known for the work that he's done. John Riggio is back with us. John, welcome. How are you doing?
Good. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Doing great. Fantastic. Actually happy that since I moved recently, I don't have oil because it's not the cheapest thing. But that being said, what are some thoughts that you have? I know the R factor is what's called with the insulation in your home. Thoughts on that to maximize the amount of heat that stays in your house? Any initial thoughts on that people can act on?
Yes. I think one thing about insulation and heating your house is looking at your house as a whole envelope of how your heat is staying inside the house. I think most people would think you would have to put more insulation on the walls, things like that. But really, when it comes to insulating the house, they've had people look at insulation, how your house is heated, how it keeps the warmth inside the house. And really, one thing to check would really be to check the insulation around your basement area, insulation in your attic, things like that. For a while, they were also looking at things like if you have old windows that aren't insulated. Also, the way the windows are put in these days, they don't insulate around the frames. And that was like one thing they were talking about, how air was getting in and out of people's houses as far as the heat is concerned, because they weren't putting foam insulation around the perimeter of the windows. So that things like that are really one thing to look at as far as keeping your house warm in the wintertime, is really looking at the whole house. It's probably difficult to fit more insulation into your walls. If you already have a newer house with bad insulation, you can't really fit too much insulation inside your walls. But there's a lot of times there might be open gaps of insulation in the floor around your basement area, attic joists, things like that. You could always add more insulation. And the other things, like I was saying, with plugging holes around your windows, things like that.
I'm glad you said that, John, because you brought back a memory. The first place I ever bought was a townhouse, and we're talking, it was in the 90s. And there was one room faced the north. It happened to be or turn into my daughter's baby room at the time. Freezing, always cold. Never figured out what's going on with this. And never take for granted that the job was done right, because I brought in somebody that had a heat camera. I think it's called thermography or something similar. And they shot the walls with the camera. And right away they said, oh, there's huge voids in your wall. You don't have insulation from here to here. There's another spot from here to here. So the builder didn't do the right thing and put insulation in the walls. So I had to open the walls up and add insulation. It was an outside wall, so it wasn't the cheapest thing, but that was the only way to warm it up. But we take for granted that, there's insulation in the walls, got to be something else. But no, you might want to, especially, I guess the best way came back to mind is feel the wall. And if it is cold, probably is lacking some insulation, and you might want to check into that.
Yes, I think so.
How about now you talked about the basement, the boiler, things like that. Any thoughts surround you there that come up, and this is, based on your experience of designing, anything that we should look at from the basement, moving our way up to keep the heat in?
Yes. Depends on how you use your basement. If you're really using the basement where it's a living space, you might want to insulate around the walls like you would on the upper floors of the house. That is one possibility. If the basement is really the unused space, you could even insulate the floor with standard bad insulation. That is one possibility.
Wow, I never thought of that. So if you have a concrete floor, you're talking about insulating that floor?
No, usually the floor would be a wood frame floor. Like you would have a wood frame floor, but your basement would be unusable space. You could insulate just the floor. If you're using your basement, if you have it whether you have a full height ceiling in your basement, you are going there using it as like a recreation room. You can insulate around the perimeter of the walls. You could fur out the walls. You could put insulation in them. Some people put spray insulation on the outside of the walls in the basement, and that would uh, keep your house much warmer. I mean, that's another thing of the whole thing with having an envelope of heat inside your house. This is something that is new. We're doing this with like a res check software that they have now, where you put all the different elements of your uh, house insulation, as far as your attic, the walls, the basement, and that gives you an overall R value of the house, and they know if your house is within an efficiency to keep your house warm as far as heating the house. So that from those ideas, you would look at your house and you would see that probably the basement area is probably under insulated. There's all the areas around just under the floor. The basement walls might not have any insulation on them. And there's all kinds of different insulation. I think right now they have also a new trend in the basements as far as insulation is they have a new insulated panel system. This is something new. A lot of people have been looking at that, installing it. It's a new insulated panel. It has like a whole track that you put around your perimeter of your basement, and you put insulation. That's one way to do it. You can just go with the basic other kinds of insulation you would use for standard construction. You would use bad insulation, you would use foam insulation, and that would give you a good R value. Some people even would take a rigid insulation. You could even glue those to the wall. Now, a lot of times, rigid insulation for like the basement area going up to the first floor, you can even put insulation on the outside of the house. That is some new construction has insulation there too. So that is some of the ways you could insulate the house. As far as the attic is concerned, it's pretty simple. You can just put regular bat insulation. You can add a layer of bat insulation in your attic. Some people put spray foam insulation these days, and that is one way you can sort of seal up the whole envelope of your house. That's a new idea that's taken hold. It's been going on for a while now, and they've even perfected it where it's on a res check software. So each job I have to fill out the res check software and print a report and sign and stamp it. This is how the insulation value is getting looked at on each job.
Is there a benefit to having spray insulation or bat insulation? Is it kind of do the same thing, or spray, if you can do it, would be much better?
Yeah, I think spray is more of a specialized type of construction. It's newer construction. Most people, they aren't going with the spray insulation. You have to really hire a subcontractor to do that for you.
Okay.
Bat insulation is much easier. It's standard. You can buy it at the local supply store and put it in. I think the homeowner can put in bat insulation very easily. The spray insulation, although it has a lot of values to it, it's newer technology, it is more difficult to install. You need all kinds of special compressors and things. You'd have to hire someone who is a specialized subcontractor to install that product, so it's more difficult.
For a second here, why don't we look at some of the little things that add up to the big things? For example, your doors. A lot of us don't even realize where we're losing heat. And I discovered this in my last house, the door that led to the garage. So much cold air was coming from it. And why was that? It was coming from underneath it, and also the door frame, because the door, even though it closed pretty tight, it wasn't as tight as it could be. So I made those adjustments to really go as tight as I can, weather strip insulation. I'm only bringing it up because what a difference that made. It was remarkable in terms of stopping the amount of cold air that was coming in. Same thing, I guess, with windows, caulking around your windows.
Well, when it comes to doors, the doors, they don't have to be insulated doors. It isn't really required. So a door going from the inside of the house into your garage, it's probably required to have a fire rating on it, You want to approximately have like a 1 hour fire rating on the door. Some might be just 3/4 hours. But the problem is the door is necessary isn't insulated on the inside. You'd have to spend a little more money get the fully insulated door, like a hollow metal door with insulation. Same thing with the doors in your house or the doors going to like the rear yard or the front of the house. The door might not be fully insulated, even though it has a fire rating. So that is one thing you have to look for when buying a door like that. You'd have to really take a look at the specifications, see that the door is fully insulated, and that would solve a problem of later on having to put weather stripping around it,
Yep.
things like that to try to keep the heat in the house.
And thank you for saying that, John, because we take it for granted. We just assume you buy a house and it's got a door and it leads to an outside. So it's got to be insulated. Why would they use anything but? Apparently not. I guess it's not a requirement when they build a home. And talking about building a home, you do fantastic work doing that. What are some of the things that you make sure that are part of your design to fight the cold, or what are some of the things that people are asking for?
Yes, I think when they look at the house, there's always some ideas of how they're going to add insulation onto the house. And I think one of them is if you really want to add the most insulation onto the outside of the house, you're doing a full renovation, new construction, would have a drive it system on the outside of your house. And you could add on to maybe 3 inches of rigid insulation. You could add a lot of insulation onto your house. I think some of the larger houses, they already have a 6 inch wood frame wall. That, of course, is adding a lot more insulation than the standard 2x4 wall. But if you're going to go with even more insulation, you would go with a drive-it system, and you could add a lot of rigid insulation on the outside of the house. And that is probably going to maximize the amount of insulation you can get on your house.
Take us through those steps there. So we have the frame, of course, the sheetrock. Inside the sheetrock, I'm working my way from the inside to the outside. Then you have, let's call it the bad insulation. You get to the plywood. Now you get to the outside of the house. What's that stuff that they typically put over the plywood that almost looks like styrofoam? I don't know. I want to say it's like a 1/2 inch or whatever. Is that also extra insulation?
Yes, it is, because that has to do with our value of your house. Like if you have a 2x4 exterior wall, the standard original bad insulation was an R13. Now they sell a slightly better one if you could find it in the supply store of a R15.
Wow.
But what happens is if you look at the equation, a lot of the walls are coming out to R19. So you have to increase it. So you have to add a layer of rigid insulation, usually on the outside of the house. That would go on top of the plywood. Now that would usually come out to a dimension of like 3/8 of an inch, a 1/2 inch. If you want to add more, sometimes they could try to get maybe an inch of rigid insulation on the outside board like that. And then from there, you could put vinyl siding over that. The vinyl siding, they have a new vinyl siding that is insulated now. So this is a new product, and that works a lot better with the building code. If you went with a standard wall and you have one layer of insulation board, and then you put insulated vinyl siding, and that meets the code requirements for that 2x4 wall on the outside a lot better. Because if you get into adding on more than like a 1/2 inch of rigid insulation, the construction is a little more involved, and it's getting into a thicker insulation board. So usually, if you have insulated vinyl siding, it works good with the standard materials that they're used to putting on the house. So that works very good. And then if you really want to increase the insulation, you want to put a drive-it system on the outside of the wall, and that you could add on as much as 3 inches of rigid insulation, and that would really give you a lot of our value on the wall construction.
Wow, pretty cool. Didn't know that vinyl siding is made to insulate. When you're designing a home and somebody wants a lot of windows all over the place, does that become challenging because that lowers the R factor?
Yes, it does. And that is another thing about the envelope and using the res check is as you add windows, they usually the windows have a certain R value to them, and as you go through the calculations on the software, if you add too much windows, your R values overall in the whole house are going to go down. And usually what happens is the R value is usually the reciprocal of the R value is usually a U value, and they total up all of those values. And what can happen is if you have too much windows, it's going to go under the requirements of your envelope for your house, and then you have a problem. So now you could add more windows. Now you have a problem of either adding more insulation or reducing the number of windows. So on some projects, people go through this. So if you really want more windows, you might have to add more insulation to other parts of the house, more insulation in your attic, maybe add more foam around the areas of the walls of your outside of your house. And that would then bring you within the code requirements. So you can add more windows, just you might end up having to add more insulation. That is one thing that goes in with the design of the house, looking at the res check and seeing if you could add more windows, and then it would require more insulation. So that's how usually the design would work.
I ran into that challenge back in the day. This is probably 2006 or 7, and was going to add a room in the back. And it was a pretty substantially large room, like a 30 by 20 room, a family room. But I wanted a lot of windows. And I was even thinking about putting windows in the ceiling, but I wanted windows around the outside as well. And the architect, who happened to be a neighbor like 2 doors down, said, "You can't do that because there's only so much you can do with the R factor and kind of compensating with more insulation." And he, you know what? He was right, because even with the windows in that room, it was always cold. Plus, you have a tile floor, so now that's radiating. Uh, that being said, any thoughts on radiant heat in the floor? Is that something that you incorporate in designs as well?
Yes, a lot of projects they're still using radiant heat. They've improved radiant heat. They've made it high efficiency now. It works on its own boiler, and the radiant heat is being used on a lot of projects. They've improved the radiant heating systems too. So on some jobs, some commercial jobs, I'm working on a very large community center where they took this whole slab. It's like a 10,000 square foot slab, and we put in a whole radiant heating system on the whole floor. So the whole slab is now heated. Before
Wow.
it wasn't heated, the whole floor is now heated. So that is, and then in residential jobs, a lot of people are going for heating up their bathrooms. So instead of having a cold tile floor, they're putting the radiant heat under their ceramic tiles and heating the bathrooms with new radiant heating system.
In terms of efficiency, where you're adding this expense to put the radiant heat in, is it really making a dent in terms of your heating bill in these rooms, or is it more of just a nice thing to have? Yeah, we'd like to have a warm floor getting out of the shower, walking on the kitchen tile. Is it really worth it in terms of saving money in the long run?
I think the idea of having the radiant floor is really so the floor isn't very cold, because in the wintertime, the floor could, if it's a slab, it could really get like a frozen solid. So I think the first idea is to heat it up so you don't have a frozen floor. And then the next idea is really the new system with the radiant heat. They've made it high efficiency. So it's like a 95% efficient heating system, similar to you would in the new central air or new central baseboard heating system. So I think the heating bill is going to come out about the same.
Okay. Yeah, and do they still use electric in radiant heated floors, or is it all plumbing?
Right now, everyone has been installing a plumbing radiator heated floor. They
Okay.
haven't been putting heating elements under the floor.
Awkward question. I'm throwing it out there. Weird. I go anywhere with this. Driveways. I've heard that people put, when you can afford it, radiant heat in the driveway so you don't have to deal with shoveling in the winter. Has anybody asked for that, in the projects you've worked on?
There are new systems of trying to heat the outside areas, sidewalks, driveways, walkways. There are some companies who are really have this kind of equipment that you can heat those surfaces. I think the only one check on that was really to see if it's allowed in the local code that
Mm.
you're allowed to heat the surfaces, because there's always a threat if the heat was to shut off, you'd have a sheet of ice. But other than that, there are companies that are selling heating systems that would go underneath your driveway and your walkways.
Yeah, I would think also, like you mentioned, community center for a municipality to have radiant heat on those surfaces probably eases up your chance for a lawsuit because you're already taking the steps to melt it before it turns into some. But to your point, uh, if it's not working, you have a big problem there. You know, you just assume it's going to be okay. How about any other thoughts in terms of keeping the heat in your house?
But I think the high efficiency heating system is good. Then there is the insulation envelope, like we went over. I think the heating slabs isn't a bad idea, that you don't have like something like it's a frozen floor or things like that. It would keep your house cold. And other than that, that is like just the basic thing. Some people, as far as energy efficiency, a lot of people are putting on those um, solar panel systems. That's helping out with some costs of the heating in the wintertime. And other than that, I think that's just about it as far as the heating and cooling goes.
One crazy little tip that just stuck in my head, changing the direction of your ceiling fan. Does that make sense? Because I'm thinking about it. Normally, you turn a ceiling fan on, it's pushing air down and around. If you change the direction, isn't it sucking the air up, like bringing the warmer air up more toward the area of the house? I've always been told that. I don't know if it really works. Ever hear of that?
Yeah, I think they have systems like that, but most of that is more concerned in the summertime when it's warm, because they have a whole thing with the heat going up to your attic, and then the heat stays up in the attic, and then it ends up heating the whole house, and you have a problem where the air is not exhausting out, so they add a lot of exhaust fans in the attic area and around the house. And that is one way to solve the problem in the summertime. As far as the wintertime is concerned, blowing the hot air back down, it isn't that much of a concern. That isn't that much of a concern. Usually they would uh, do that with insulation in your attic. That's other than that, the use of blowing the air around isn't used as much in heating.
So you're hypothetically you're designing a brand new home. Which would you opt for? Forced hot air or baseboard heating?
I think today everyone is going with the forced hot air, so they can get your air conditioning in the summertime and you have your heat in the wintertime. And a lot of times they also like to split it into two zones too, to try to optimize the amount of heat and cooling are going on during the year.
Hmm. A lot of good tips here. And I know it sounds cheesy, but I haven't done it this year since I recently moved. But I used to put on some rooms that just were cold or the windows just weren't efficient, plastic wrap around the windows. You're never going to open the window during the winter, but I got to say, it used to make quite a difference in keeping that draft from coming into the house. I'm just going to say that it could work for me, and it's just a simple little tip and doesn't cost a lot. You know, you go to a supply store and buy the kit of the plastic wrap and just use a heat gun, blow dryer, whatever, and just shoot it around so it shrinks into place. Any small tips like that? Anything pop in your head, John?
Well, I think putting wrap around the windows, that it really isn't like under architect work that much. It's more like just like home improvement, maybe trying to get some more air out of it. I think as far as if someone was saying that the window is no good, I think you'd have to go through and see that you have a window that is well insulated. Window construction is made differently. Some are more well insulated than other construction. They have a solid wood window. They have windows now that they have insulation around the jambs of the window, around the headers, sills, and also they have insulated sashes too. So the whole thing is completely insulated. Of course, those windows probably cost a little more, but if you really want to get the best windows, you'd want to get the ones that are fully insulated. And then also you want to, when they're installed, they have to put in the foam insulation around the perimeter of the window. And that is the new style of installing the window, is to completely seal it with foam insulation. So that is would solve the problem with air infiltrating through the window, and you get the maximum R value. If you were to buy a window that doesn't have the air insulation, you're probably going to get a similar problem with air just infiltrating in through the window. And then if you put an air film over that, could help you. But I think looking at as far as architecture work goes, you'd want to get the best insulated window you can. A lot of vinyl windows are made with solid insulation, so you can get a basic vinyl window that's completely insulated. They're making them now. And but you'd have to really look at the specification. This is like with the doors. You have to look at the specification, make sure you're really buying the correct window that's fully insulated, and looking at it that it has the correct R value on there. The window panes are double insulated, and they have triple insulated windows too. If you were even in a colder climate. So, but at minimum, most people are going with a double insulated window. And that would keep your window from having air going through it and keep our value as high as possible on that.
What I'm hearing from you, John, is if you're going to either new construction, or even if you're replacing your windows, don't cheap out, because you're just asking for trouble down the road. Go for as much as you can afford. And if I remember correctly, and I don't know if this is still done, isn't there gas, I think it's called argon gas or something like that, in the window to seal it? Do they still do that?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and as I found, if you have cheaper windows, the gas can leak out, then you don't have the insulated properties. Then you have condensation sometimes that gets in there, because if the gas got out, something can get in. So yeah, go for the more expensive. John, great having you on. Love the tips today. And if anybody's looking for a redesign, advice, even looking to build from the foundation up, just go to the website, John Riggio, RIGGIO.com, and talk to John. He knows, this guy knows a lot. He is well known in the New York area, and that is the biggest city in the entire universe here. John, always having you great on, and happy holidays to you and your family.
Yes, happy holidays to you. Thanks a lot.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.